It was one of the most disturbing cases in court TV history. Shanda Vander stood trial in Michigan, charged with first-degree murder and child abuse after her 15-year-old son Timothy starved to death while under her care. The jury heard shocking testimony about Timothy's life with his mother, about being force-fed hot sauce, enduring ice baths, and locked out of the pantry while his body deteriorated. Shanda took the stand to testify with her own version of events, even vomiting at the sight of the evidence photos. But the jury didn't buy it. She was convicted and sentenced to life. But now, Shanda Vander says that sickness during trial warrants a do-over. Will she get a new trial? But first, Maddie, Kaylee, Ethan, and Xana, 4 University of Idaho students brutally stabbed to death in their off-campus home in the middle of the night on November 13th, 2022. The accused killer captured across the country in Pennsylvania. He originally maintained his innocence until he struck a plea deal with prosecutors to avoid execution. And yesterday, after an emotional day in court for family and friends of the victims, Bryan Kohberger has been sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. And now that Kohberger's story is over, investigators have released hundreds of pages of documents from their investigation into these homicides. And tonight we're bringing you the new details from the statements of the surviving roommates. Good evening and welcome to Closing Arguments. I'm Julia Janae, filling in tonight for Vinnie Politan. Thank you for being with us as we're looking at a brand new chapter in the tragic case of those 4 University of Idaho students. There's been so much that has happened in the last 3 years that it seems like it's been a roller coaster of circumstances, especially for the family members and that community, because it all started in November of 2022 as a mystery, an unknown suspect. We in the public didn't even know who may have done it. There wasn't a released suspect description, no suspect photo or sketch. For 6 weeks, this college town there in Moscow, Idaho, they lived with the terror of knowing that a person who could do this brutal killing was still out there. Then on December 30th of 2022, just before the new year, it was announced that the suspect was Bryan Kohberger, arrested 2 time zones away in Pennsylvania. But fairly quickly, he lawyered up. And our criminal justice system, it accurately gives him the presumption of innocence. He's cloaked in it. So because he's innocent until proven guilty, the entire focus became proving his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And then just weeks before a trial would lay out the entire prosecution of this case, this defendant accepted responsibility. A plea deal means that he avoids the Idaho firing squad, and he's now a convict, a quadruple murderer. The Bryan Kohberger story, it comes to an end here. But for 3 years, a gag order and other investigative protections, it kept everything that the law enforcement officials across this country, everything that they were doing, a secret. And now that all ends. It ended with the final sentencing of Bryan Kohberger to 4 life sentences, consecutive, paving the way for now a host of documents to be released. And they shine a light on the countless hours of police work that it took to get to this moment. And one of the first documents we want to review tonight is the initial police report from a surviving roommate, Dylan Mortensen. She saw the killer creeping through her home in the early morning hours of November 13th of 2022. And we have here some of what that investigative report said, as read by one of our producers.
Dylan went to a party at 10:30 and arrived home between 12:30 and 1. Maddie and Kaylee arrived home from the corner club around 1:30 or 2. Dylan said she woke up around 4 a.m. because she heard what she thought was Kaylee dancing with Murphy the dog. She recognized Kaylee's voice and heard Murphy barking. Then she thought she heard Kaylee go upstairs and say, "There is someone here," and then run back down the stairs. She said Kaylee sounded scared. Dylan said she jumped up and locked the door because she didn't know what else to do and called out to Kaylee. And then she tried calling Kaylee, Xana, and Maddie on their phones. Dylan said she then opened the door again and heard who she thought was Kaylee, but it could have been Xana, crying in the bathroom. Then she heard a man's voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." He did not say it in a nice way, and she had never heard his voice before. Dylan said she then opened her door again. The guy is right there, between her door and the kitchen. She said he was about her height, 5'10" or taller, not skinny, but athletic build. He was wearing all black with a mask that covered his forehead and went around his face. The mask exposed his nose but covered his mouth. She believed he was white but did not remember eyebrow color or what his eyes looked like. When she saw the suspect, he saw her and just left. She believed he was holding something near his stomach or belt line. She used both hands to point straight out from her abdomen and then moved her hands apart and back together to simulate a bulge. The area was black in color, and she thought maybe it was a gun. She said the unknown object had an arrow shape. Dylan watched the suspect go out the kitchen door and leave. Then she closed her door and locked it as fast as she could. Once he was gone, she called her downstairs roommate, Bethany, and then she went to Bethany's room and locked the door and went to bed.
It's chilling to think about what it must have been inside of this home in the wee hours of the morning. This is 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. Let's bring in our think tank to talk about these brand new documents that we have been pouring through. We are so happy to have with us Atlanta criminal defense attorney Eklund Mercy. We also have out of Pennsylvania attorney Ali Crothhamel and in Arizona criminal defense attorney Josh Colesrud. Glad to have you all here on this Thursday evening. Eklund, let me start with you. In these details that we're hearing now from the surviving roommate, how confusing must it have been for the police when they started investigating this case to hear an account like this playing out inside of this off-campus housing?
Well, I think that law enforcement actually had enough evidence for a lineup, but like more of an auditory lineup, in the sense that that quote, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." In certain lineups, you usually are used to photographic lineups, but you can have certain defendants actually state certain phrases and hope that the victim can identify it. So there are certain, just based off of that recount, there are certain things that police officers could have used to just confirm their just confirm their case and make sure that they got the right person.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, because just knowing that there's a possibility that Bryan Kohberger was saying, "I'm going to help you," before then carrying out the brutality of this. Ali, what do you think in terms of listening to this survivor? Does it change your opinion at all? I don't know what your opinion was on this plea deal versus going forward with a death penalty case, but does hearing from her impact at all your opinion on that part of it?
I think these are kids, right? They're college kids. They're in a party house. There's people coming in and out constantly. We know that they were under the influence based off the documents. I don't know if they knew what they know now that they would have reacted the same way. But again, you have college kids. You have people coming in and out. They're half, under the influence. They're in and out of sleep, the documents say. So I don't think that they're to blame. I think they should be considered victims. And I think hearing that the death penalty is off the table basically secured that he would be in life in prison for the rest of his life, and also that they wouldn't roll the dice on the death penalty, right? Because that's a second trial. So after you have a conviction for life in prison for murder one, then there's a second trial for the death penalty, and who knows if they would have gotten that.
Yeah, for sure. And Josh, we're talking about someone who would have to get on the stand, would have to relive all of this. Is that something that prosecutors took into account when making that deal?
Yes. I mean, they specifically stated that, they contacted the victims in the case and their families, and half of them at least stated that they didn't want to go through and be re-traumatized by going through a trial. Now, one of the things that I gleaned from reading the news supplements was, the statement where he says, "You're going to be fine. I'm going to help you." For me, I'm trying to think about motive here. And it sounds like it's very calculated, that he's almost playing out some fantasy that he's planned for at least 3 months, because that's how many times his cell phone pinged outside the house before the murders took place. So, what we have to kind of put together now is what would make him do this. And we know that he was part of the incel community based on his history, his internet history, as well as nihilistic fantasies and those websites. And so what these women were and the man were everything that he was not. They were popular. They had friends. Most of them had boyfriends or girlfriends, in which he didn't. He made statements to somebody at the university that he was desperate really for a girlfriend. Specifically, he used his position to try and unethically hit on women at the university. And so this almost seems like he is playing out some morbid fantasy. And that statement alone is just so scary coming from Dylan, that she heard the killer say this as Kaylee was running down from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor. At least that's who she thought it was. We know that Kaylee was located on the 3rd floor. At least that's where she died.
Yeah, that's what adds to what likely was confusion inside of that house. And all those things that you're talking about, those things that we wish we could have heard from this defendant about the motive, he chose not to say anything during his sentencing hearing. But the judge did highlight the courage of Dylan Mortensen, because she showed up inside of that sentencing hearing. She spoke, read her victim impact statement. Let's take a listen back to that moment.
I was barely 19 when he did this. We had just celebrated my birthday at the end of September. I should have been figuring out who I was. I should have been having the college experience and starting to establish my future. Instead, I was forced to learn how to survive the unimaginable. I couldn't be alone. I had to sleep in my mom's bed because I was too terrified to close my eyes. Terrified that if I blinked, someone might be there. I made escape plans everywhere I went. If something happens, how do I get out? What can I use to defend myself? Who can help? And then there are the panic attacks. The kind that slam into me like a tsunami out of nowhere. I can't breathe. I can't think. I can't stop shaking. All I can do is scream because the emotional pain and the grief is too much to handle. My chest feels like it's caving in. Sometimes I drop to the floor with my heart racing, convinced something is very wrong. It's far beyond anxiety. It's my body reliving everything over and over again. My nervous system never got the message that it is over, and it won't let me forget what he did to them. People call me strong. They say I'm a survivor, but they don't see what my new reality looks like. They don't see the panic attacks, the hypervigilance, the exhaustion, the way I scan every room I enter, the way I flinch at sudden sounds. They don't know how heavy it is to carry so much pain and still be expected to keep going, and that's because of him. He stole parts of me I may never get back. He took the version of me who didn't constantly ask, what if it happens again? What if next time I don't survive?
Eklund Mercy, it's full of so much pain, that statement, but she faced him. She went inside of that courtroom, which is never easy for a surviving victim.
Which is actually surprising to me in the sense that why he's taking a plea. Usually with serial killers, they actually revel in the fact of having a trial, wanting to bestow control over the victim one last time, wanting to make sure that they control the reactions. So it is very surprising, especially like if you can see like Gacy, BTK killer, A-League, they usually have the trial because they want to have that interaction with the victim. You can see it actually is almost painful. So it's actually him having enough mercy to plead is kind of odd based off of how heinous the crime is.
Yeah, Allie, he pleaded apparently. We didn't hear anything from him. He wasn't asked to allocute, but we didn't see any emotion from him at all, really, during this entire sentencing hearing. Some people tried to analyze whether he was nodding a bit, smirking a bit. Really, he just kept that blank expression. Do you think that his attorneys told him how to sit there and be during the hearing?
Quite honestly, I think Bryan Kohberger has no feelings. I think he is a sociopath and a psychopath, and he does not feel. But he needs control, right? So I think he honestly enjoys hearing people cry and say their loved ones are gone, and that may be why he pled. Also, what I think is ironic is, he was facing the death penalty, and he obviously took a plea to get that off the table. So he is presumably scared of dying, yet he killed 4 people. It's very ironic. And I the no motive, the no connection, the mystery around this case is very concerning, because still we have no answers, really.
So many questions still left, Josh. And when it comes to what happens next, the judge spent a lot of time talking about how this is a closing chapter on Bryan Kohberger. Let him go into obscurity. Let's never even speak of him again. And reminded everyone that though he can't appeal, he then did say that you can't appeal, but you can file a notice of appeal. What do you make of that? Do you think we see anything next coming from the legal side for Bryan Kohberger's case?
Yes, definitely. So even though a defendant accepts a plea agreement and waives his right to appeal, he doesn't waive all of his rights. So a defendant always retains the right to appeal for ineffective assistance of counsel, also prosecutorial misconduct, and if there is a manifest injustice. That is, that the judge gave him an illegal sentence. Now, all 3 of those appeals or types of appeals are very hard to be successful at. And, in this case, it was clear to me that Mr. Kohberger entered into a plea agreement because, he wasn't in control anymore, and he was scared of the death penalty. He was a coward, so to speak. And, he didn't want to face the ramifications of losing at trial. Now, not speaking during the sentencing hearing may help him on appeal if he does choose to do so, because if you accept responsibility and actually say you did something, you say you did the thing, then the way that the appellate judges now look at it is what's called a harmless error, that anything that the prosecutor did or didn't do, or the defense attorney did or didn't do, or even the judge has to be looked at in a different lens, because it's him saying that, I did it. Again, we already know that he did it because of the plea agreement, but it's reaffirmation. And it'll be much, much more difficult for him going on if he made any type of admission at sentencing, despite the plea agreement.
Yeah, and who knows how this criminology student's mind works, what we may see from him on the record. We'll, of course, continue to follow this case. Let's do this. Let's take a short break. But when we come back, we're going to talk about another newly released report, and this time from the interview of the other surviving roommate and something distinct that she heard that night. Plus, here's a preview of what's coming up in the next hour on VPI. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates, the man convicted of killing 4 University of Idaho students has been sentenced to life behind bars. Now, the Moscow Police Department has unsealed hundreds of pages of documents from the case, and we're bringing you the new details about the crime scene.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates. Tonight, 9/8 Central, only on Court TV.
2 parents face a jury
Over the attempted murder of their own daughter. Court TV takes you inside the trial that's torn a family apart.
The attempted honor killing trial. Live coverage continues Monday morning, only on Court TV.
I was so frantic that morning and scared to death, not knowing what had happened. And when I made the 911 call, I couldn't even get out the words. And from then on, I don't remember a thing. It was like my brain wiped that whole memory. That was the worst day of my life. I hope that they are remembered for who they are, not what happened to them, because who they are were so beautiful, and they deserve to be remembered in the highest way.
Those were the words of the second surviving roommate, Bethany Funk, read aloud in court by a close friend of hers. Bethany, we know, was home asleep at 1122 King Road when Bryan Kohberger snuck in and brutally stabbed her four friends, four college students, in the dead of night. Now, unlike Dylan, Bethany didn't see the suspect at all, but she did hear something that we hadn't previously heard inside of this home. Here's what she told police the next morning. Now, this newly unsealed supplemental report from her interview states that Bethany went to a fraternity party around 8:30 with Ethan and Xana. And after leaving the party and going to another friend's home, she walked home around 1 a.m. And Bethany said Maddie and Kaylee returned home between 1:45 and 2 a.m. Then she hung out with Kaylee and Maddie in Kaylee's room upstairs. And Bethany and Kaylee took Kaylee's dog Murphy outside between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Then sometime between 4 and 4:20 a.m., Bethany heard what she thought was a firework, and she says she saw a spark on the ground from under her door. Then Bethany said she heard Kaylee's dog Murphy barking. Dylan called Bethany and said she had seen someone in their house. Bethany told Dylan to come sleep in her room, and they went to bed. They woke up around 11 a.m., talked to some other friends who came over. That's when they checked on Ethan and Xana and found them deceased before calling 911. Let's bring back in our think tank to talk about these new details that are coming out. We still have with us Eklund Mercy, Allie Crothamel, and Josh Colesrud. Allie, let me start with you. Firework and a spark. That's new. We hadn't heard that kind of a detail. We don't know if that is what she heard, but it's certainly something that she said close in time to police after this happened. Allie, let me start with you. Can you hear me? All right, Eklund, I'm gonna wait. We're gonna work on Allie's sound because I can't hear her. But Eklund, tell me what you think about the fireworks spark. You know, we've heard in the 911 call what was said, but this is a detail that hadn't come out before.
Well, I'm just concerned about safety in general. When you have roommates and it's four girls involved and we don't have any ring camera footage or Alexa footage or anything like that, or you know, a laptop footage, something to show, you know, to corroborate what's going on. Because not only do we want to make sure that you have the right person, you want to make sure that there were any accomplices because of just how heinous the crime is. You know, if anybody cooks or anything like that, you know what it is to stab a piece of meat. Can you imagine, you know, a human being, you know what I'm saying? Like just being treated like nothing. And that is how heinous it is. And with that being said, we don't have anything else. It's just, and for somebody to do that to four people and not, you know what I mean? It's just,
it's unimaginable.
I think,
yeah,
it's just unimaginable. But it's also like logistic wise. Do we have proof that there's some noxious gases that were in the house that maybe, you know, knocked them all out? Hence why everybody was sleepy and tired or something like that, that would make it so that, you know, the cries, because, you know, we know parents who will eat in the car because they can't eat in the house because the kids can hear. So can you imagine if somebody's getting stabbed, you know, in a room, just that blood curdling scream, what all happened after that?
Josh, Eklund raises a good point about accomplices. I remember when this first broke, when he was first named as a suspect, there were questions about if he asked if anyone else was arrested. We haven't seen that confirmed anywhere, but it was in a lot of people's mind that there might have been someone else. Do you think that that has been completely cleared up now that we have what we have, that we only have Dylan seeing one other person inside of the house, or could there be a lingering question?
It's definitely a lingering question, but looking at the facts that are available, and I've gone through the 314 supplements in preparation for today, and I didn't see anything in there myself, having done many, many homicides in my career, that would point to the fact that Bryan may or may not have had an accomplice. Now, I'll tell you, when I looked at the supplement that Brittany and Dylan are mentioned in, one of the things that struck me was their consistency. So when I'm evaluating a case and I'm looking at the different witnesses, I want to see what, do their statements align with the facts? And the first thing we know is that Dylan said that around 4 o'clock in the morning, she heard someone that she thought was one of her roommates upstairs scream that somebody is in the house, Kaylee. And then around 4:20-ish, we know that Brittany started frantically calling all of the roommates that were left in the house, and nobody picked up the phone. And we know this because the phone records correspond to what Brittany was saying. So what Brittany said and what Dylan said are consistent. Their timelines are consistent. And I like that when, if I'm a prosecutor, I can rely on these witnesses. I don't feel like they knew the perpetrator. Also, having heard Brittany and Dylan during the sentencing, and they are both victims, don't anybody doubt that. They are so genuine, and they both have survivor's guilt. It's so apparent in the way that they're talking, and they get so much harassment online for not doing this or not doing that. Nothing that they could have done would have changed anything. And if they would have walked outside of their rooms, they could be dead. And so they are victims, and we have to treat them like victims
100%.
And really hope that they recover.
Right. The blame is only on Bryan Kohberger. Absolutely. Allie, I want you to speak to that survivor's guilt, because I was encouraged to hear during those victim impact statements from Bethany and Dylan that they now understand that even if they had called 911 immediately and paramedics were on the other side of the door, they still wouldn't have been able to save their friends. But that's a lot for them to carry, and we see that a lot when there are survivors who have close loved ones near them who pass away.
Yeah, I don't envy them at all. I don't think anyone envies them at all. They're lucky that they're still alive. And you heard the girls in their statements basically say, why do I get the chance to live? Why am I the one who survived, right? And that's something they have to live with every day for the rest of their life. They pack up and go to college, and then they're turning around and going to their best friend's funerals. It is something so unimaginable. But, they're going to need a lot of therapy, a lot of support, and a lot of community support. The online support for them, like Josh said, they are victims, and whether they called 1 minute after the crime or 12 hours, it wouldn't have changed it. They were gone.
Absolutely. They are survivors, they are victims, and we wish them all of the best. The think tank is going to stay with us. We do have to get to a break. You heard Josh mention, though, there's 314 documents that were dropped yesterday. So we're going to, in the next hour, continue to go through those. But after this break, we are going to switch gears, because there's a trial that we talked a lot about here on Court TV. You all, as viewers, couldn't get enough of it. It was a mother of She's convicted of murder of her teenage son with special needs, and he's starved to death inside of her home. And you won't believe what she's asking the court for now. Stay with us.
Ms. Vander, isn't it true? Timothy had just become nothing more than an annoyance for you, and he wasn't even a human being in your eyes anymore.
That is absolutely not true.
In December 2023, Michigan mom Shanda Vander testified in her own defense during her murder trial for the death of her 15-year-old special needs son, Timothy. Timothy only weighed 69 pounds when he died, and investigators found evidence of abuse and torture in the house.
The night before he passed, I had less than an hour of sleep.
Was this outcome expected by you?
Absolutely not. No.
Timothy Ferguson was already dead when first responders arrived at her house.
You look like that when you put him in the bathtub?
Shanda Vander never returned to the courtroom to finish her testimony.
My client is suffering a medical issue. We were hoping that given some time this morning, we'd be able to get her to a point where she'd be able to come and join us. She'd be competent to do so. She is content to rest at this point and simply allow her legal team to go forward, representing her in this matter and concluding this particular trial. Therefore, I'm asking the court at this point to continue with the trial and without my client being present.
Later that day, it took jurors about an hour to convict Shanda Vander Ark.
People of the state of Michigan versus Shanda Van Ark, we find her guilty of first-degree felony murder.
Shanda Vander Ark was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Now, new attorneys are asking for Shanda Vander Ark to be granted a new trial. According to court documents, her appellate attorney says Vander Ark was denied effective assistance of counsel. The motion also claims Vander Ark was not competent to make any decision about whether or not to continue and that she was in a catatonic state. Her attorney spoke with Court TV about her situation after she was convicted.
I came to see my client, and she was in a catatonic state. She's having some emotional and mental difficulties with this entire process, with the entire thing for 18 months. We sat and we talked and we discussed that it would be better if she just remained where she were and to remain not sedated, but in a situation where she wasn't required to receive much input. And she made the decision based on my recommendations and my explanation to her of her options.
That's right. The woman convicted of starving her teenage son to death wants a new trial. You heard her attorney. You saw him, first of all, patting her on the back, comforting her while she was on the stand during her trial, and now she's turning on him. She says that she was in this catatonic state throughout the trial proceedings. And you remember, towards the end, Shanda Vander Ark began hyperventilating. We could see it on camera. She was showing signs of some sort of a breakdown. And after that, she didn't come back into the courtroom at all. Even when the judge handed down the verdict in the courtroom, she was nowhere to be seen.
People of the state of Michigan versus Shanda Van Ark, count 1, charging open murder involving the death of Timothy Ferguson. We find her guilty of first-degree felony murder. Count 2, first-degree child abuse. We find her guilty of first-degree child abuse.
So is this evidence that she was not competent for the trial or didn't consent for them to go forward with the trial? Let's bring back in our think tank. We have Eklund Mercy, Ali Kromthamel, and Josh Kolsrud with us. Good to have you all. Josh, let me start with you because we have a situation here where her attorney got her to sign a document saying that they could go forward with trial. She was inside of that jail cell and she was not able to go into the courtroom. She's now saying she wasn't in any position to sign and consent. So does this negate consent?
The short answer is no. Every defendant always appeals and says that they suffered ineffective assistance of counsel. In this case is no different. Under U.S. v. Strickland, which lays out the elements of what ineffective assistance of counsel would be, you have to show that the defense attorney's actions or inactions were so inadequate that it infected the trial, and but for his actions or inactions, that the result would have been different. Now, with the catatonic stuff, it's interesting that she's making this argument because everybody in the courtroom was a witness to her testifying. And I read every account of her testifying, and everybody describes it as lucid. She understands what she's doing. And I've tried guilty except insane cases, which deal with this issue. And basically the standard is, if you're dealing with a defendant who is saying they're incompetent or insane, when you ask them their name and their response is, the sky is blue, they have to be like in a different universe. And not only that, but she was declared competent at a competency hearing before the trial even took place. So I really don't see how this claim has any merit whatsoever, and I don't see it being successful going forward.
Eklund, in that motion that she made, she also brought up that she didn't think she had enough visits from her attorney. There was an expert that she wanted to be called, and she says she didn't consent to him arguing manslaughter during the closing argument because she would not have agreed to that, basically murder or nothing, and the jury didn't come back with manslaughter. They still came back with convicting her of murder, but she had an attorney who was the chief public defender. He's now retired, but he had 50 years in terms of a law career. What do you think her chances here are for a new trial?
First of all, like, big ups to the attorney, because she's not going anywhere but to prison. Here's the issue. She is charged with, she was convicted of child abuse and felony murder. She wasn't even charged with murder of first degree. So the underlying felony is child abuse. Your child didn't become 69 pounds over an evening, ma'am. He didn't become malnourished over a weekend. That was work. You put in work to be that neglectful. And now he passed away, and it's foreseeable that if you don't feed children, they will die. And that is what happened. And that is why she was found guilty. And then another thing is what happens is in discovery, you get pictures of everything. They give you everything. She saw every single photo, and she had access to every single piece of evidence prior to her having stomach issues. So I don't see any reason why there should be any appeal here. She got the best outcome based off of the worst circumstances.
Are you saying she faked it, Eklund?
Hell yeah, she faked it. 1,000%. Nothing's wrong with her except for her being evil. That is terrible. She was a trash parent. Maybe that's just her. Prison. She should go to prison.
And I want to mention, because we're showing these pictures of Timothy on the side of your screen, and you may be wondering, we keep saying he's 15, but when you look at him, he's so young. She didn't have any other pictures of him on her phone from when he was a preteen or a teen, which just added to the neglect part of this. Ali, I want you to get in the final words, because to Eklund's point, we've got a situation where if she was faking and now she's trying to get a new trial because of her catatonic state. We've had other defendants who have been too sick to proceed. Robert Durst comes to mind. At the end of his trial, he didn't show up. Lori Vallow Daybell tried to argue she had a sickness and needed to delay her trial in Arizona while she was representing herself, but she still had to show up. Do we want the defendants to think that it's easy to get out of coming to court and possibly stopping their trial, or do we lean towards wanting it to continue regardless?
I would say we lean towards wanting it to continue as long as they're actually competent. Like Josh said, she had a competency evaluation and a competency hearing where experts, medical doctors, deemed her competent. And her lawyer didn't think that she was competent but wanted to proceed, so he had her sign a consent. So, I mean, at this point, I don't know. We would be stuck in a judicial backlog like we were in COVID if every single defendant does what this defendant did.
Ali, thank you so much for that. Eklund and Josh, we have to say goodbye to you, but we appreciate you all being with us. That's all the time we have for that. But when we come back, we're going to talk about something else you need to know tonight. Plus, here's a look at what's coming up in the next hour on VPI. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates. Before he accepted a plea deal and admitted to his crimes, Bryan Kohberger told prosecutors he couldn't have committed the murders of the 4 University of Idaho students because he was out stargazing alone that night. Newly unsealed documents reveal how investigators were able to debunk Kohberger's weak alibi.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, coming up next, only on Court TV.
Donna Adelson is facing charges of murder, the death of her former son-in-law.
Now that Donna has turned into a defendant, what's next for the Adelson clan?
The matriarch mastermind murder trial. Live coverage this August on Court TV. Quiet.
Welcome back. We've reached the point of the show where we reveal something else you need to know tonight. Let's put it up on the big board. There she is. We just talked about her. trying to not show up to court due to sickness back in the day. Lori Vallow Daybell, who some know as the Doomsday Cult Mom, will be back in an Arizona courtroom tomorrow for what could be the last time for her sentencing in 2 cases for which she was recently convicted: the conspiracy to commit murder against her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, and the attempted murder of her former nephew, Brandon Boudreaux. Here's Julie Grant with a preview.
The state put forth a bunch of evidence in this trial in an effort to make you dislike me, to try to attack my character, so that you would just say guilty no matter what evidence they showed you.
Lori Vallow Daybell stood in front of a Phoenix jury and attempted to convince them that she had nothing to do with the 2019 shooting death of her 4th husband, Charles Vallow.
As the state has mentioned, they are alleging that insurance money was my motive. Spouses having insurance policies is not a crime. Collecting Social Security is not a crime. Self-defense is not a crime. A family tragedy is not a crime.
No charges were initially filed, but after her children disappeared and were then found buried in the backyard of her new husband, Chad Daybell's property, Chandler, Arizona police reopened the case. Her 9-day trial involved her questioning Charles Vallow's sister, Kay Woodcock, her clashing with law enforcement, and her bullying a woman who had had dinner with Charles the night before he was killed.
Miss Woodcock, did you see or hear or personally witness me conspire with Alex Cox to kill my husband, Charles Vallow?
No, but I saw a ton of evidence that did.
Okay, you're a detective, right?
Correct.
You have to look at all the angles, right?
Correct.
You don't know what happened, right? You just stated that you weren't there, right?
Correct.
On the website that you met him, did he say he was divorced?
I'm not certain.
So you spent your whole date getting to know each other, talking about me.
Don't flatter yourself. No, we did not spend the whole time talking about you.
It took jurors about 3 hours to convict Lori Vallow Daybell. 2 months later, she was back in the same Phoenix courtroom, again acting as her own attorney.
Conspiracy is an ancient word that appears in the Bible on many occasions. Judas conspired against Jesus with the chief priests for 30 pieces of silver.
Object to, unless this is being presented at trial, I'm not sure that this is appropriate opening.
This time, Lori Vallow Daybell was in court for an attempted homicide case. The intended victim, her niece's ex-husband, Brandon Boudreaux.
If you thought that you had just been shot at, were you not worried about standing there in the driveway where someone could drive by again?
The person that shot at me was in the Jeep, and I had seen them leave. Of course, I was scared for my life, but I was told to go back to my house, so that's where I went.
Lori Vallow Daybell did her best defending herself and also tried the judge's patience.
If I open the door, do I get a hearing? We stop trial and I get a hearing
Stop. We'll have a very short hearing, okay? If you're going to introduce how you have great character and good character, we're going to have a short hearing on what evidence that they can bring in to rebut that character, which could include being convicted of 4 murders. So
and would you
talk to your advisory counsel during the break. And
you don't need to yell at me either.
I'm at you, okay?
Yeah, you are, and you do not need to talk to me that way. I'm very courteous. I'm very courteous to you.
No, you have been nothing near courteous to me during the course of these proceedings.
It took jurors less than an hour to convict her. She'll be back in court one more time for her sentencing. She could receive 2 more life sentences, in addition to the other 3 she's already serving in Idaho for the murders of her 2 children, JJ and Tylee, and the murder of Chad's first wife, Tammy Daybell.
Again, that final sentencing Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern. You can watch it right here on Court TV Live. Before we leave you tonight, though, there is a picture I do want to show you. Take a look at your screen. This is Luta Alanna Arapahoe. She is 17 years old, and she was last seen on July 22nd in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. If you have any information about where Luta is, call the Sioux Falls Police Department. The number is on your screen, or you can call 911 or 1-800-THE-LOST. Let's see if we can get Luta to a safe place tonight. That's all the time we have for in this hour of closing arguments, but don't go away because we have another hour of live true crime coming up next on Vinnie Politan Investigates.